My name's Stephen Todd. I'm the design editor of the Australian Financial Review newspaper here in Sydney, Australia, and I'm delighted to be invited to present you this series of encounters with some remarkable architects. We are going to hear from Amanda Levitt from ALA in London, from Rem Koolhaas and David Giannotten at OMA in Rotterdam, Studio Mumbai, Bijoy Jain in Mumbai, Karma Pinos from Studio Karma Pinos in Barcelona, and from Australia, Glenn Murcutt in Sydney and Sean Godzel in Melbourne. The Melbourne architect Sean Godzel was commissioned to design the first MPavilion in 2014. Something of a challenge because it was a paradigm which didn't exist in that location, so he had to create it from scratch. I like to think Sean took inspiration from the archetypal garden shed. He created an articulated metal box, the walls of which were separate panels and they could be raised at different angles during the day and would be closed again overnight. So they'd open and close kind of like a flower. The second iteration, Amanda Levitt from ALA in London, Amanda also referenced the vegetal aspect of the garden setting, but she proposed a much more deconstructed pavilion. And in essence, it was composed of a mass of very fine black carbon fiber stems, atop which were posed white resin, perhaps petal shapes or perhaps seed pod shapes. And these would slightly undulate in the breeze and create very beautiful shadow plays. Bijoy Jain from Studio Mumbai, the third iteration in 2016, Bijoy's MPavilion was a bamboo structure which was lashed together with rope, and it had a very, very elegant, curved, attenuated roofline, which from a distance almost looked like it was sweeping as low as the manicured lawns of the Queen Victoria Gardens. Very elegant proposition. OMA, Rem Koolhaas and David Giannotten from Rotterdam, they took inspiration from the classical amphitheatre and created a gridded, articulated box which could differentially frame and reframe city and garden views, and of course change its structure for the various interventions that were happening inside it. Karma Pinos visited Melbourne and in fact visited Rem Koolhaas and David Giannotten's pavilion the year before, and in some sense I feel that hers was in dialogue with theirs. It was also an open-ended structure, although Karma's pavilion was composed of interlocking timber planes, which are ajourés, so batons with light that could come through them and create this very beautiful shadow play, and they were kind of like tucks and folds, almost like a couture garment. The most recent MPavilion, which was closed just in February this year by Glenn Murcutt, Australia's only Pritzker awarded architect. Glenn took inspiration from a picnic that he had under the wing of a light plane in the Mexican jungle in the late 1980s. Like that aeroplane wing, Glenn's pavilion was composed of a tensile fabric, which he lit from within. So that at night it acted as a lantern in the park. And like that jungle picnic, it was a space of quiet respite. The great distinction of the MPavilion programs, and this is very important for something I'm going to tell you in a moment, is that they're gifted to the City of Melbourne. At the end of their first life, which is the installation in the Queen Victoria Gardens, they have a second life, and they are installed in various places across the greater Melbourne area. Just two final things before we get you into this series of encounters and conversations. Each of the 6 MPavilions, the process and the programming, are gathered together in a publication called MPavilions, Encounters with Design and Architecture. Now, that book was meant to be launched at the Venice Architecture Biennale in May, but of course the Venice Architecture Biennale, like almost all other cultural and other planning of meets, was cancelled in the wake of COVID-19. So the publishers, Thames and Hudson, will be launching the publication in August. Now, it's a beautiful compendium, art directed by one of Australia's finest art directors and graphic designers, Fabio Ongarato of Studio Ongarato. And it's a great pleasure to see what Fab has done with the book. Each chapter about each of the pavilions is written by an esteemed architecture and design writer globally. The introduction is by myself. This year, also as a result of COVID-19, there will be no new MPavilion in the Queen Victoria Gardens. The programming will go ahead, and that site in the gardens will be kind of almost a phantom site, so ephemeral it doesn't exist. But the key to it is that the 6 other MPavilions installed in their permanent locations will each be activated across the Antipodean summer. So in these various locations with different communities, each of the 4 months is themed. And the programming is really based on an expression of interest, which comes from the community, as well as programming from institutions and academia. So in effect, it's a 6-point nexus of cultural infrastructure across the entire summer of Melbourne. And that's a pretty good outcome. If you can make it to Melbourne later in the year, that would be awesome. In any case, really enjoy these encounters with architecture and design. Thank you.